All right, let's set the scene. It's early 1943, and the Japanese Empire is, well, it's absolutely massive. It stretches all the way from Burma out to these tiny remote islands in the middle of the Pacific. They control everything: oil, rubber, you name it, all of it fueling this incredible war machine. But back in Washington, the American top brass are drawing up plans for a huge rollback. We're talking about an offensive across the biggest ocean on the planet. And get this, it wasn't just about winning a few battles. Nope, this was about inventing a whole new way to fight a war, a way to literally strangle an entire empire.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the big argument over strategy. Then we'll follow two huge separate attacks happening at the same time. After that, we dive into the massive naval battles that really sealed the deal. And finally, we're going to face the brutal, almost unbearable price of what it took to win.
Right, so everyone agreed on the big picture. Japan had to be defeated. But, and this is a big but, the second that goal was set, the American High Command basically split right down the middle. The question wasn't if they were going to attack, but how and where. And you had two major camps, each pushing a completely different plan for the road to Tokyo.
And this is where you can really see that fork in the road. On one side, you've got the larger-than-life Army General Douglas MacArthur. His plan, a tough, grinding, land-based slog through the jungles of New Guinea with the ultimate goal of taking back the Philippines. For MacArthur, this was deeply personal. He'd made that famous promise, "I shall return," and he meant it. But then you have the Navy. Led by guys like Admiral Nimitz, they had a totally different idea. They said, forget the jungle. Let's go for a faster, more direct approach. Their plan was to hop from one tiny island chain to the next, right across the Central Pacific, creating a straight shot to get their bombers over Japan.
So, with these two completely different plans on the table, what did the High Command decide? Well, in a move that says everything you need to know about America's industrial power, and, let's be honest, the crazy rivalry between the Army and the Navy, they decided to do both. That's right, they didn't choose. The big takeaway is that America was about to launch two gigantic, totally separate offensives at the same time, fighting their way across thousands of miles of ocean on parallel tracks. It's just unbelievable.
All right, let's kick things off with Admiral Nimitz and the Navy's push across the Central Pacific. You know, they had this powerful new fleet of aircraft carriers ready to go, but their very first move was going to be a brutal, bloody reality check on just how hard it is to attack an island from the sea.
So their first big target, a place called the Tarawa Atoll. Now, if you looked at a map, it was just this tiny little speck of coral in the ocean. But in reality, it was a fortress, a concrete and steel nightmare, riddled with bunkers all connected to each other, bristling with machine guns. And the Japanese soldiers defending it had one order: fight until you are dead. And the cost was immediate and just horrifying. A massive intelligence failure meant nobody realized a coral reef would stop the landing craft way out from the shore. So the Marines had to get out and wade for hundreds of yards, completely exposed through a storm of machine gun fire. It was a total kill zone. Just think about this. Of the 5,000 men who hit the beach on that first day, 1,500 were killed or wounded on day one.
This quote really sums it up. It took 3 days of the most savage, close-quarters fighting you can imagine. We're talking flamethrowers just to clear out single bunkers, to finally take that tiny island. And the Japanese defenders, out of almost 4,200 of them, only 17 were taken alive. Tarawa was a terrible wake-up call. It proved without a doubt that there would be no surrenders. Every single island was going to be a fight to the absolute death.
Okay, so while the Navy is getting this brutal lesson at Tarawa, thousands of miles away, General MacArthur's campaign is kicking off. And he's facing a totally different kind of hell. This wasn't about coral reefs and beaches. For his troops, the enemy was the jungle itself, impenetrable, disease-ridden, and just as deadly as the Japanese soldiers hiding in it.
So MacArthur's first big plan was called Operation Cartwheel. Basically, it was this giant pincer move designed to trap and cut off the main Japanese base in the area, a place called Rabaul. But man, the progress was just agonizingly slow. The soldiers weren't just fighting an enemy they could see, they were fighting malaria, dense jungle, constant rain, you name it. It took 9 solid months of just grinding it out to finally surround Rabaul and make it useless to the Japanese.
So once both of these campaigns started getting close to their first goals, that old argument flared up again. Where do we go next? The Navy's plan was to skip the Philippines entirely and aim for Taiwan instead.
But MacArthur, well, he flew to Hawaii for a high-stakes meeting with President Roosevelt himself, and he completely charmed him, powerfully making the case for liberating the Philippines. MacArthur got his way, and that decision, it would end up having some truly horrendous consequences.
Now, as these two giant land campaigns are on a collision course, the war out in the open ocean is about to hit its peak. The Imperial Japanese Navy. I mean, these guys were once the absolute terror of the Pacific, but they were about to be completely shattered in two of the biggest naval battles the world has ever seen.
And this chart just shows you everything. By the middle of 1944, American factories were just pumping out an insane amount of ships and planes. It was overwhelming. So you get to the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and it's not just that the US has more carriers and more planes. The American pilots are experienced vets. The Japanese pilots, they're mostly rookies. The result was an absolute slaughter. The American pilots even nicknamed it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. It was that one-sided. Japan lost 3 aircraft carriers and hundreds of planes they just couldn't replace.
Just 4 months later, the Japanese Navy rolls the dice on one last, desperate plan. They take their last 4 aircraft carriers, which barely have any planes on them, by the way, and use them as bait. The idea was to lure the main American fleet away from the Philippines landings, and incredibly, the American admiral, Halsey, he falls for it hook, line, and sinker. He takes his big ships and chases the decoy, leaving the American landing force almost totally exposed. All that's left to protect them is this tiny group of small ships. What happens next is one of the most unbelievable David versus Goliath stories in naval history. These little ships literally charge straight at giant Japanese battleships. In the end, the decoy carriers are sunk, and the once mighty Imperial Japanese Navy is, for all intents and purposes, finished. It's gone.
With their navy at the bottom of the ocean and their air force in tatters, Japan turns to a truly terrifying new weapon. It was born from pure desperation and this military code where dying for the emperor was the highest honor, the kamikaze, the divine wind. This wasn't just a few rogue pilots. It became an official, organized military tactic. Pilots intentionally crashing their bomb-laden planes directly into American ships.
So, the U.S. now controls the sea, which means MacArthur can finally launch his massive invasion of the Philippines. This should have been his ultimate moment of triumph, but instead, it was the beginning of a whole new level of horror, especially for the Filipino people he was there to save.
And of course, MacArthur's return was pure theater. He had the cameras all set up as he dramatically waded ashore on the island of Leyte. He gets on the radio and delivers this powerful speech, making good on his promise. It was an incredible propaganda victory, a huge symbol for everyone back home. But the picture-perfect landing was one thing. The actual fighting was going to be something else entirely.
What happened in Manila was an absolute tragedy. You see, the top Japanese general in the area actually wanted to declare Manila an open city to avoid a battle and spare the civilians. But a local Navy commander completely disobeyed those orders. He decided his 20,000 men would turn the capital into a fortress and fight to the last man. The battle for Manila lasted a month. It completely destroyed the city and killed 100,000 civilians. Many of them were deliberately massacred by the Japanese defenders as the battle turned against them. Just a horrifying, pointless slaughter.
And looking back, you have to ask, was the battle for the Philippines even necessary? For all of its symbolism, for all of MacArthur's promises, there's a strong argument that it was a strategic mistake. Why? Because by that point, American submarines had already basically won the war of supply. They'd sunk so many Japanese ships that Japan was already cut off from the oil and rubber it needed. The country was already being starved into defeat, which might have made the entire bloody land campaign to free the Philippines tragically unnecessary.
I mean, just look at the brutal math here. You can see this terrifying pattern emerge. Just look at the U.S. casualties. About 3,000 at Tarawa, then it jumps to over 16,000 at Saipan. And then in the Philippines, it skyrockets to more than 82,000. The cost in human lives was just exploding with every step. And for the Japanese, it was basically total annihilation in every single fight. The grim reality was this. The closer the Americans got to Japan, the harder the Japanese fought, and the more blood was spilled for every single inch of ground.
And all of this leads to this really deep, really troubling paradox. By the spring of 1945, Japan was beaten. Strategically, the war was over. Their navy was gone, their cities could be bombed at will, their supply lines were cut, their people were starting to starve. Allied victory wasn't a question of if, but when. But, and this is the crucial part, the Japanese military gave absolutely zero indication that they were even thinking about surrendering. So this left the Allied leaders with the most terrible question of the entire war. What do you do when your enemy is clearly defeated but absolutely refuses to stop fighting? When every single projection shows that a full-scale invasion of their home islands will cost millions of casualties, both yours and theirs? How do you finally bring the war to an end? How do you stop paying that unbearable price for victory?